Come and join me, sing hallelujah. Jehovah Jireh has done me well. Do you know why I'm singing? And do you know why I'm rejoicing? I'm rejoicing because we finally freed ourselves from the bondage of these plant trends. I feel like 2025 is honestly the best time to be a plant parent because not only are we approaching this hobby with a bit more decorum and common sense, but we're finally having a bit more of a life and we're not locked inside our homes like the pandemic, where a lot of these crazy, unpractical, not sustainable, downright ridiculous plant trends emanated from. And if you are still participating in any one of these plant trends, I mean, it's fine. I won't judge you so harshly, but without much ado, I've made up a list of 6 plant trends that I'm so glad, so glad we finally let go of in 2025, and I'm hoping they never make a comeback. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Some of you may forget, but I will never forget such a sight. Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about fertilizer water. Yeah, back in the day, during the Panini era, there was something called fertilizer water, and a lot of the Instagram girlies were apparently into it. Basically, it was a concoction of different types of fertilizers, growth hormones, God knows what else was inserted in that cocktail. And the girlies were storing it in these transparent barrels and they were using them to water their plants instead. I cannot be the only one that remembers and encounters seeing this. Please, if you did, validate me. This is definitely not my imagination. This definitely happened. That is how crazy we were. People were not using ordinary God-given water to water their plants, but a couple of the girlies on the likes of TikTok and Instagram were making these cocktails called fertilizer water. I remember they were blue, green, different colors, and they would add their little droplets into the fertilizer water, and they were using that to water their plants instead. And that is what was happening in the likes of 2020, 2021, even as late as 2023. A lot of people were honestly just complicating this houseplant care. Mind you, our parents and our ancestors and those before them have been into houseplants for millennia, and they weren't doing all the shenanigans we were doing. So yes, fertilizer water, I still remember it as clear as day. And if you participated in the fertilizer water shenanigans and still do, please let me know your thought process in the comment section. What was the rationale behind it? Did it have any benefits that we do not have? I would wager that not only is it a whole lot of work, but it's also unstable. I mean, I don't know a lot about chemistry, but I want to think that if I mixed up all those concoctions and stored them over time, they will begin to oxidize, react, whatever, become unstable and potentially harmful to our plants, which might explain why this trend thankfully fizzled off. But yeah, girlies, fertilizer water, it happened. It's not my imagination. It actually was a thing back in the day. Now, girlies, do you remember when tissue culture was seen as this evil thing? I remember back in the day as a millennial elderly, when I heard the term tissue culture, it wasn't something a lot of the planty girlies and the influencers were looking forward to. Back then, it was seen as this thing that made houseplants inferior. I remember back then, again, please confirm what I am saying, so that I don't think this is a case of false memory syndrome. But I remember back then, a lot of people would frown on a plant that was tissue culture. They were on a hunt for a non-TC plant, especially when the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma came into the scene. Do you guys remember? There was this odd obsession with a non-TC variant of that plant versus a TC variant of that plant. Oh my goodness gracious. The girlies truly back then felt that tissue culture was bad and tissue culture plants were inferior, so they wanted a plant that wasn't tissue culture. Girlies, trust me, as somebody who lives in a country where tissue culture technology is not used to mass produce ornamental plants, all I can say is thank God for whoever invented tissue culture. My American girlies, my North American girlies, my European girlies, my Southeast Asian people around the world, where tissue culture is being employed to mass produce plants, you all don't know how lucky you are, because it makes a lot of these ornamental plants readily available, accessible, and affordable. In this part of the world, houseplants are now even more expensive than they have ever been, and a lot of plants just aren't commercially available. So tissue culture technology is definitely a good thing, and is why a lot of houseplants are really affordable for you guys that have access to the technology. But yeah, back in the day, it was seen as this thing that, oh my goodness, do not get it. If you can, try as much as possible to get a plant that is non-tissue culture. It was seen as this thing that we had to like fear in the houseplant community, and we had to avoid. Again, am I being delusional, or did this really happen? Let me know in the comment section. It's not easy being a plant historian and investigative journalist, because the thing about trends is that they come and they go, and we tend to forget them really fast, but some of us never do. I'm low-key glad this one is over. I'm low-key glad this one has freed a lot of us from the bondage and the chokehold. I'm talking about propagations. Back in the day, the standard and the norm was that you should propagate your plants. That full plant, that trailing bush, that trailing vine, simply propagate it and stick it in a pot or a jar. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with propagating, but propagating your plants a lot can actually end up overwhelming you, because you have all these duplicates, all these jars that are breeding ground for algae and mosquitoes littered around your house, and before you know it, you have 50 pothos plants. This is partly why a lot of the girlies got burnt out. Just because you can replicate a plant through propagation doesn't necessarily mean you have to. And I'm so glad a lot of us have started to assume a bit more self-control and common sense when it comes to propagation. That full lush pot with multiple pops in a pot, you don't have to divide each pops. You can just keep it in the same pot. That way it's easier for you to manage, and you have a bushier and better looking plant, in my opinion. Also, propagating a plant too often can actually lead to the demise and decline of that plant. I have come to learn now that it's always good to give intervals and let your plant have a resting period when you propagate them, as opposed to just chop. That's how you end up with a stunted plant, or a plant that just goes into shock and doesn't grow after 900 years. So yes, I'm so glad we now approach propagating plants in a more reasonable and better way than we did back then, when we felt the need to propagate every single plant like we were going crazy. I'm calling this next point jungle maximalism, because that was the aesthetic, that was the standard aesthetic back in the day. If your house and your window didn't look like this, how dare you call yourself a plant parent? Back in the day, it was jungle. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a jungle if you can pull it off, if you have the time, the energy. You work from home and you don't have that much of a social life, then you can actually pull off the jungle look. All good and dandy, but for a lot of people, it certainly wasn't sustainable, practical, or functional. And that is also partly why a lot of people lost interest in this houseplant hobby. Thankfully, is it just me, or is there like slowly becoming a resurgence, a more sensible approach to this hobby, and a more sensible resurgence of plant lovers who are beginning to dive back into this hobby again? Let me know if you're observing that good upward swing. But back then, the standard was jungle. But now what I'm seeing is more curated spaces and more like small pockets of plant areas in people's homes, which is more practical, more sustainable, more doable, and will ensure that you enjoy this hobby more without you burning out. So in as much as the jungle look it's the look, it can be the look, especially when properly put together. It is not for everyone, it's not for every space. And just because you have 5 plants or 10 plants, or heck, even 2 plants, doesn't make you any less of a plant parent than somebody that has 100 plants. We're in the spirit today. Somebody shout hallelujah. But yeah. By the way, if you're feeling this content, why haven't you subscribed? I don't know why I have to keep reminding some of you all to subscribe. It's the one way you can support my channel for free. Like and subscribe. However, if you want to take it the extra mile and send your boy a couple of pennies, a couple of your hard-earned dollars, I wouldn't mind that. You could do so by donating to my Buy Me a Coffee or joining my YouTube membership for more premium and exclusive content. Membership girlies, I'm going to drop a video in the coming days, so watch out for that. Okay, now let's move on. This next point, I wrote just one word: philodendrons, because back in the day people were moving like philodendrons were the only plant genus that existed in the world. If it wasn't a philodendron, the plant influencers, the rare plant snobs didn't want to hear you speak. It had to be a philodendron. Bonus tip: if it was a variegated philodendron, perhaps a philodendron with velvety leaves. Philodendron, and nothing else. It had all the girlies on a chokehold. Now, philodendrons are fantastic. They're still low-key one of my favorite plant genuses, and I still have a fair share of them in my collection. But right now, I am so glad we have freed ourselves from the chokehold of philodendrons. In fact, what consequently happened is that a lot of people fell out of love with philodendrons, and now that genus isn't even the reigning genus in town, which is typically what happens when you obsessively collect or hyper focus on any genus of plants. I'm side eyeing you girlies that are into anthuriums and Hoya, my American girlies. You love your Hoyas, but let's take it easy. So they don't end up like philodendrons. Okay, now it doesn't necessarily mean that we all hate philodendrons. It just means that there isn't so much of an obsession over them as there used to before, which now has reduced their prices and has made them a bit more affordable, especially for some of us in the third world trenches. Yes. So yes, I am glad to see that we've started to free ourselves from the chokehold of philodendrons, and our collections are beginning to look more diverse, a bit more eclectic, as opposed to just moss poles, because largely a lot of philodendrons are climbers. So this is where the whole moss pole phenomenon probably birthed from, because they look their best in moss poles and all of that. Speaking of moss poles, I have to include this. I'm so glad that a lot of us have honestly started to free ourselves from the burden that was moss poles. It really was a burden, especially back then where the industry hadn't caught on to the demand for moss poles. So a lot of people were actually or had to DIY these moss poles. They had to go to the hardware store, buy mesh nets, buy those little rods that they will stick inside. Oh my god, I remember watching a couple of those videos as a beginner, and I was so overwhelmed, because not only did it seem like a chore and a lot of work to get those moss poles, to maintain them and all of that, but a lot of the materials needed to make them just weren't readily available in my part of the world. So I always used to feel very inadequate as a plant parent. But now we know better. And we realize that moss poles aren't actually necessary. Here is this pothos frigging growing on a bamboo stick, on a bamboo pole. Moss poles aren't the only climbing options that exist. I remember at one point, and this is also a point I probably should have added, but let's just use this as a bonus point. Do you remember when the girlies were using wooden planks, to attach their plants as a desperate attempt to free themselves from the chokehold of moss poles? Anyways, that is to say that moss poles aren't the only things that will make your plants climb. There are so many other alternatives that are less stressful, less inexpensive, and right now the likes of Temu and AliExpress have even made it easier for you by pushing out those mass-produced plastic. Not the biggest fan of plastic see-through moss poles that you can insert anything into. You don't necessarily have to limit yourself to sphagnum moss. Heck, I use soil. I insert soil in mine. Sometimes I insert manure in mine. So yes, the point is just do what works for you. I think that is like the crux of this whole video. At the end of the day, if there's anything you take out of it, don't follow these trends blindly. You're an adult at the end of the day with agency, reasoning faculty. So just do what works for you and stick to it, as opposed to following plant trends blindly. Hallelujah, somebody. Guys, we have to move on because this country is a sauna. It's hot and sticky. Oh my goodness gracious. You guys that have fall and winter don't know how lucky you are. It's an oven every day. Now moving on to the next one. This one may just be me, so I need you guys to help me confirm if I'm not being delusional and if it is truly the case. Babes, macrame hangers. Back in the day, 2020, 21, macrame hangers were pretty much all the rave, and it seemed like they were the standard way to go about hanging your plants. Now, I love me a good macrame, right? I love it. It gives me this boohoo 70s, decor, and it can look cute. But if you use macrame hangers, you know that they are not very functional and it can be a bit impractical. For one, it can take you 900 years and even lead to the damage of several stems and leaves of your plants just to remove the plant from the macrame to washer it. Coupled with the fact that it can also get dirty. And for some strange reason, I don't know why, but a lot of macrame hangers just came in white, which, white cotton doesn't always pair well with houseplants because it is inevitably going to get dirty and messy, and it's just extra work for you to constantly keep having to wash. So that is why I personally stopped using macrame hangers. But again, I don't know, is it my imagination or is it just me, or did other people also similarly stop for the most part using macrame hangers? Now it doesn't mean we've all stopped buying them, but it's just that now more options that a lot of people prefer. In fact, while I was researching this video, I found a ton. There's even self-watering plant hangers on the likes of Temu and AliExpress. Oh my goodness, there are so many other alternatives that are just a bit more functional, easier to clean, easier to manage, a bit more practical. See, it almost has entirely eliminated the need for macrames, and why a lot of people don't go to them, especially people that have large collections, don't use them primarily as hangers or plant hangers anymore. But back then we were really crazy about them. Or am I being delusional? Is this a case of false memory syndrome? Did this really happen? Let me know in the comment section. But girlies, I think we have exhausted our points. Oh really, I was really enjoying this conversation. I enjoy making these sort of videos. It just feels like I'm chatting with my besties and we're gossiping. It just feels really, really casual and fun to make. But I'm curious to know your thoughts in the comment section. Do you agree with these trends or these points that I mentioned? Also, if I see that you guys are feeling the content and liking the video, I'm gonna do a part 2 but with a different spin. Plant trends I want us to stop right now, like right now. So if you want to see that, please just support this video, like, share, send it to your Facebook groups. If this video does well, I'm gonna double down on it. I'm here to serve you guys. I'm here to serve you guys and deliver what you guys like to enjoy. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, like, share, all that good stuff. Have mercy and donate to your boys, buy me a coffee, or join my YouTube membership to support me further. And I will see you in the next one.